Newslight. The country is blessed with a 7.8% GDP growth for the first quarter, with 3 credit ratings upgrade to investment grade. There is more reason for us to work harder and rally behind the President's leadership to sustain growth and reduce poverty incidents. A major plus is more foreign investments to enhance job generation. And joining us tonight on News Live is Mr. John Forbes, the Senior Advisor of Arrancada Philippines, an advocacy group of the Joint Foreign Chambers of the Philippines in support of pushing sustained economic growth. Good evening, sir, and welcome to News Live.
Thank you, Robert. It's great to be back on this news show again.
Sir, to start us off, do you think the Philippines can sustain the 7.8% GDP growth for the second quarter?
Well, I wouldn't look just at the second quarter. I look out for several years ahead, and the government's target is 7 to 8%. I think that's sustainable, but it depends upon keeping up and even increasing the reforms that have been ongoing for the last several years.
So looking at your advocacy group, what is Arrancada Philippines pushing to support the President's commitment to attain inclusive growth to reduce poverty incidents?
Well, it's a very broad document, and any of your viewers who actually want to take a look at it can find it on the website under arrancadaphilippines.com. But certainly we support a lot of the social infrastructure that this administration has been instituting or expanding, such as increased membership of Philippine Health and the very important reform of K-12 in education. A very important area now is increasing infrastructure. With higher economic growth continuing, there will be increasing demands on the physical infrastructure throughout the country.
Sir, you mentioned infrastructure. The government has committed to increase spending for infrastructure to 5% of GDP. Now, do you think this will answer your concern that in the past less resources were devoted to infrastructure? Do you think
less resources have been devoted for a long period of time, and currently it's about 2.4% of GDP, which equates to $5 or $6 billion. In Davao at the PDF, Philippine Development Forum last February, the government committed to a higher target, doubling it in effect by the year 2016 to 5%. Now, with growth of the GDP from today at 250 billion to well over 300 billion by 2016, you're talking about an amount of about $15 billion being spent on infrastructure. That's a lot more. That's really a tripling of where it is now. But if you look around, if you look at the roads, you look at the ports, you look at the airports, you look at the power and telecommunications or private sector spending. We're talking here about government spending. You'll see there's a tremendous need to modernize infrastructure.
Now, looking at all these programs by the government, do you see this, what kind of impact do you see on tourism and agriculture and other industries?
Well, tourism is one where there is a plan, a National Tourism Development Plan, which makes a great deal of sense. There are particular areas that are prioritized, and there is infrastructure spending going in to fix the roads, the electricity, the lighting, in these areas. There's a very ambitious target by the year 2016 of getting tourism up to 10 million. Airports clearly are a challenge to get that done. Agribusiness is an area where the country underperforms in comparison, particularly for agricultural exports. One reform I would note is completing the 25-year-old CARP program, which expires next year, and allowing some diversified forms of agricultural, including corporate farming. There are many, many opportunities in Asia with a growing middle class everywhere you look. 90 million more middle-class people in Indonesia by 2030, much larger numbers in India and China, throughout ASEAN, growing economies. And the Philippines can export specialized crops into those economies.
Now, sir, looking at foreign investments, do you see them coming in soon given the credit rating upgrade of the Philippines to investment grade?
Well, they're not really looking at the credit rating. Credit rating is something that's good for the government so that it can borrow at lower rates, borrow more easily, and of course it reflects the strong positive macroeconomic management by the economic team and the president. But what investors look at, it depends on the business that the investor is doing. If he's in manufacturing, he has to look at his labor costs. He has to look at the number of holidays he has to pay, the minimum wage, the skills of the workforce that he can hire. And the Philippines has a very, very abundant workforce, but it doesn't always have the correct skills that the investor is looking for. If it's low-cost labor, frankly, the country has lost it. I look at the exports of footwear and garments from Vietnam to my own country, the United States, and there are many, many times what the Philippines still has because it's too expensive here. Cost of power is too expensive. So every investor looks at different things. Now, the government is definitely looking at areas of investment that can create a lot of jobs. I mentioned too, tourism and agribusiness. Manufacturing, I hope there could be a revival of that. And there are more Japanese companies coming in, about 100,000 new jobs being created in that area. And I didn't mention the BPO sector, of course, which will reach about 1 million in that activity by the year 2016. So as long as the human capital has the skills for BPO, I think that'll continue to grow as well. I haven't mentioned mining. Mining is not going forward right now, and the country has periodically moved forward on mining and then it's stopped, it's paused, and it has great potential. It can produce a lot of income, even add 1 to 2% to the GDP growth if they get it right. And getting it right now depends on getting a proposal which the public has not yet seen through the Congress in the near future that may increase the income for the government, but if it asks for too much or the Congress asks for too much, that makes the country less competitive, then mining will be hindered for some time to come.
Now, taking all of this into account, in the 16th Congress, amendments of the economic provisions of the Constitution will be revived by Speaker Feliciano Belmonte. Will you support this move?
Well, you may have seen in the newspaper recently that a large group of business associations and the foreign chambers with which I am associated have among 8 areas of reforms written to the President, and that was one of them, that the economic provisions in the Constitution be examined. It's unusual for a country to have these restrictions in its Constitution. Normally they're in laws, and as I understand the proposal of Speaker Belmonte, he is suggesting simply that they be removed from the Constitution and then allow the Congress to deal with them as individual laws in the future.
Sir, briefly, looking at all these restrictions, what kind of provisions affect the competitiveness of the country in attracting foreign investments?
With respect to laws, there's a foreign investment negative list there, or with respect to the Constitution. I'll ask you a question, Robert, which you're just talking about the Constitution?
No, but looking at, let's say, trying to create a better atmosphere in the business industry here in the Philippines, what kind of provisions do you think needs to be looked at or discussed?
Oh, well, I'd certainly mention, I'll go back to infrastructure, getting it moving faster. We look around, the Terminal 3 at the airport is 20 years and still not completely operational. LRT-1 South is a project going on for 15 years. The Supreme Court is not a predictable body, the Court of Appeals. A number of decisions recently there that cause investors pause. Local governments sometimes don't follow national laws. We saw that in an open pit mining ban that's in effect down in South Cotabato for the last 3 years. That is clearly in violation of the 1995 Mining Act. We see it over in Subic, where there's a writ of kalakasan against a very essential power plant. You realize only one power plant has been built in Luzon in the last 10 years. It's just coming on stream. So unless more power plants are under construction soon, it's quite possible that we'll be having brownouts in Luzon within 2 years. So there are a range of these challenges, which of course always are going to be there. And the government is aware of them, and investors are optimistic that they'll be moving on the challenges, ahead of the challenges before they become crises.
Sir, finally, what other programs is Arrancada Philippines doing in support of the government's programs?
Well, it's very broad, a broad document with almost 500 recommendations. I guess one area I haven't mentioned is encouraging freer flow of tourists to come into the country and more connectivity in terms of airlines. We did pass a law last year. Well, I don't say we, the Congress did, and the President signed it, but we had testified in favor of it to level the playing field on some taxes regarding airlines. We've been encouraging our governments, the Philippine government, to move on the challenges of the American downgrading of the CAP, so that has restricted some increased flights into the United States using new aircraft by Philippine Airlines and other airlines such as Pacific that would like to fly there, and I'm optimistic that should be resolved after several years of working on it under the current leadership at CAP this year. There's a long list, Robert. We could spend the next hour talking about it.
I wish we had more time, but on that note, thank you very much for joining us here tonight at News Live. That was Mr. John Forbes, Senior Advisor of Arrancada Philippines. Thank you, sir.
Good. Thank you very much. Good night.
News Live.